Welcome back to Psychedelics Today, a weekly podcast exploring the science and culture of the emerging psychedelic field with your hosts Kyle Buller and Joe Moore. Today on the show, I get to chat with Dr. Ryan Westrum, a psychedelic integration therapist. Dr. Westrum is a nationally recognized psychedelic integration expert. For more than 15 years, his primary focus has been working with individuals and groups facilitating experiential therapy and integrating psychedelic journeys into healing and personal transformation. Ryan speaks on a myriad of topics and leads experiential groups like Dreamwork Integration Therapy and Psychedelic Integration Groups. He's the founder of HealingSoulsLLC.com and PsychedelicIntegration.net. Ryan offers a multitude of models ranging from hypnosis to various forms of breathwork practices to engage in therapy and working towards wholeness within oneself. And he's also one of the co-authors of the book, the Psychedelic Integration Handbook, which is what we get into talking about today. This really awesome book that Ryan has put together, all on psychedelic integration. It's a beast. It's, I think, over 400 pages long. And I really had an awesome time chatting with Ryan. It seems like we have a similar theoretical orientation and foundation from, the Groff framework, holotropic breathwork, and whatnot. So this was just a really fun chat. Always like to chat about integration, especially with somebody who has a similar background in that Groffian world. So I really enjoyed this chat, and I hope you enjoy it too and get something out of it about integration. It's been one of our main focuses over here at Psychedelics Today, breathwork and integration. So I really thought this was an awesome episode and really happy to connect with Ryan. So you can check out his work at psychedelicintegration.net. You can find him on Instagram. I think it's Psychedelic Integration as well. And I think that's actually how Ryan and I stumbled across each other, was on Instagram. Love the connections that I end up making on there and just connecting with other cool people doing cool work. So definitely check his work out, and I guess we'll do a little bit of business. So this episode is brought to you by Onnit. If you want to snag anything from Onnit, I literally just got those mushroom immune pills and some vitamin C from there, because as I record this, we are in the midst of the coronavirus, and I am trying to keep my body healthy. And Amazon was all sold out of stuff I wanted, like host defense. So if you want to check out Onnit, and I'll give you a report next time on how I like the supplements. But yeah, you can use the coupon code SCI at checkout and then get 10% off there. We're also brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day free trial membership. You just go over to audibletrial.com/psychedelics today and sign up for that 30-day free trial and get some cool books. If you're like me and most of everybody around the globe just sitting around, maybe you're not, maybe you're working, and really awesome if you are working, because I know a lot of people are either on hold or maybe got laid off, which is really unfortunate and probably really, really stressful. But I've been trying to pass some time when I'm not working on Psychedelics Today here with some audio books and podcasts. And so I have some stuff lined up here. I think I'm going to snag Eric Davis's High Weirdness. That's definitely in the queue to download and get. I just saw that being released on Audible, so I'm really excited. I have a friend who just talks really highly about that book, and so I'm really excited to grab the audio book when I get a new credit. So if you want a 30-day trial membership, again, that's audibletrial.com/psychedelics today. And yeah, go sign up there. What else do we have going on? We are launching a new cohort of navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists, and that starts in May. So if you want to learn more about that, go on over to psychedeliceducationcenter.com, and you can learn more about the dates. I believe it's the first Thursday in May, which is May 7th. So it begins May 7th. We have 2 times, 2 p.m. Eastern time and 7 p.m. Eastern time. And you'll get 8 virtual calls with Joe and I, get to chat live. It's a hybrid course. Watch all the pre-recorded material and then jump on the Zoom calls with us for an hour and a half and have a classroom time so we can chat, share ideas, and dig deeper into the topics. So I think that's it. Obviously, everything is a little bit on hold right now with Joe and I were trying to plan some breathwork workshops, but had to, I think, cancel some of those, and some events are getting canceled as well. So, yeah, I just want to take this time, kind of run through that intro, but also I just really hope everybody is staying safe and well out there. I know it's a really chaotic time, probably feels really scary for some folks as people are starting to lock down, or just really kind of seeing the news, people getting sick all over the world. This is a lot of chaos right now. And, I think as psychedelic literate people, or people that have been into this world, I feel like this is a good time for us to step up and really try to ground some of this energy, right? Sometimes it feels kind of psychedelic in a sense of what's really going on here, all the chaos, the emotions, and I think that we're pretty adapted to sitting with difficult emotions, especially if you have been engaging in this work to do that, to really sit with emotions and to try to transform that. So yeah, how can we get together? And then also, I keep asking the question, like, what are some big takeaways that we're starting to learn from this, right? I think about some of the big takeaways for me is like community, and just wanting to find like a really solid community, people working together, realizing, hey, we all are connected, right? Something that happened in China that really kind of got started there has had a global impact, and just how we're all connected in this. Usually when, certain natural disasters happen, you might feel a little bit disconnected, but this feels like a very global thing that's happening, and we're all kind of going through it together. So we're all connected here. And then also, how are we going to integrate this experience? We're starting to see, or it feels like, systems are crumbling. We're seeing like an overwhelm with, the medical establishments, and just, it really feels like a lot of our way of living is being disrupted. And what is this really teaching us? I mean, some of it feels very similar to lessons that people have received in psychedelic experiences, right? So also, how are we going to get through this time together, coming together as a community and really working together to get through this? And then how are we going to make some changes when this passes? Hopefully, it's not going to be drawn out as some people are predicting, but yeah, what lessons are we going to be taking away from this, and how can we really integrate this experience and maybe make some changes in our lives, right? I know this experience has really been getting me to sit with myself, not having a spleen, and being a little immunocompromised is like, it feels scary sometimes. But so it's really been kind of forcing me inside to really focus on some priorities, and focus on like, hey, what do I think is important here in life, and how do I want to spend my time here, right? That's what it's actually been really kind of getting me to think about, was alignment, and how do I want to spend my time here? Because our time here is very precious. So just some thoughts, but I really just am wishing everybody well, and hope you, your families, your friends, your communities are staying safe and healthy, and we'll get through this. We're all in this together. So stay well, everybody. Many blessings to you. And again, if you like what we're doing here at Psychedelics Today, feel free to subscribe to us, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. Leave a review on iTunes or Facebook. That really helps us out. One of the best ways to help us out is to share our content, share a podcast, share an episode, share an Instagram post, retweet something. That really helps us. And if you are feeling inspired, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/psychedelics today. And I will leave on that note. Again, everybody, stay healthy and enjoy this episode with Dr. Ryan Westrum. All right, welcome back to Psychedelics Today, everybody. Today we are joined with Dr. Ryan Westrum. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm very grateful to have an opportunity to talk to you.
I'm super pumped. So I think we originally got connected through Instagram, and I was seeing that you're promoting your book, the Psychedelic Integration Handbook. For anybody seeing this video, I got it here right in front of me. And integration's been a huge topic in our work here. So I was reading through a bunch of this, and just before I hit the record button, I was saying that, as I was reading through some of it, I felt like I was even reading some of my work. And I'm just really excited because I feel like we probably align with different traditions, with the Groff tradition, breath work, and just the way we approach this stuff. So I'm excited to dig in. But can you give the listeners a little bit a background about who you are really quickly before we jump into everything?
Yeah, thank you. I'm a clinical psychologist based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I've been practicing as a licensed marriage therapist as well for the last 15 years. And my focus is predominantly in two different categories. One being psychedelic integration in my life of working both professionally and personally with psychedelics, as well as sexuality. So another realm that I work deeply in is through healthy sexuality, promoting relationships, as well as working through addictions. So there's really a confluence, a merging of the integration work and the sexuality. Private practice and consult at different addiction centers through harm reduction and teach a lot to the youngsters. My biggest advocacy lately is working with the youth and just really educating, and maybe be able to talk a little bit about that down the road. But
That'd be awesome.
educating the youth and the misnomers and the perils and pitfalls of what that looks like.
Educating the youth about
Psychedelics. Yep.
So you are doing that work.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So attempting very, very grassroots, looking at talking to, students. I have a 14-year-old daughter, so I have an avenue in to really hear at the heart of high schoolers and listening to what's going on right now, and really kind of clearing the air, not necessarily advocating, but what I would call myself as a psychedelic parent is giving them kind of the territory.
And are you doing that like within like classes or psycho ed at a high school or somewhere else?
Yeah, I've started recently with a couple of classes, and then also just doing private workshops. So
Wow.
The advocacy is with parents. So having parents and then bringing in their children that are of age, where it's becoming a forum of conversation. It's quite fun to have these little healing circles with a mother or father or caregiver and their child. And then there's just this open, real safe, very intimate conversation of what it looks like to be not only a psychedelic parent, but also advocating for that harm reduction model that Zendo and the rest of our culture is attempting to influence.
That's amazing. How has that been received by the parents and everything and the community?
Carefully. And I make fun of myself because I'm doing things and really feeling into what the parents are asking for. And a lot of it is nuanced, right? So when I meet with these adults, I have already built, I guess, a rapport and an understanding because they're either working with me or they've been curious. And so it's breaking down a lot of the stigmas and a lot of what the preconceived notions are.
Yeah.
And then fostering open dialogue. I'm a big believer of seeking understanding. So trying to understand what the needs are and having a forum for that.
That's amazing. I think it's such like a needed population that really needs psychoed. I used to work with at-risk teenagers in residential, and a lot of them would talk to me about their drug use, and I would always take like this harm reduction approach, and it was just amazing to just hear what they didn't know,
Right.
and to just try to provide a little bit of safety. And I always felt like I was kind of skating on the edge at times of like, ooh, am I going to get in trouble here? But a lot of people have always asked me, like, do you provide any harm reduction work to teenagers? And since I've gotten outside of that work, not the moment, but it's always been a really interesting population to want to work with, because I mean, how many teenagers are kind of doing this as a quote unquote rites of passage? They don't know about it, but you're at this huge transition point in your life of coming into being, your identity, and you're doing a lot of exploring. And it's like, at some point, it's like this is the population that really needs a lot of harm reduction, because a lot of just making mistakes, and they're doing it already, right? And how could we even be like, this is a group of people that need an honest conversation at times.
Yeah, and that's where I appreciate what you're saying, because there's so many different statistics right now. Some say over 30 million people are ingesting these substances, be it psychedelics, at some level a year, And, a large portion of them is exactly what you just said, Kyle, is their rites of passage at the youth and the teenagers. And then here we are with a hotbed of situations, be it safety, harm reduction, concerns of mental health because their brains are still developing. So it just goes into 18 trillion different ways.
Yeah.
And the request I'm having is just to be able to say, okay, this is what it is, this is what it isn't, right? Breaking down the misnomers. And full disclosure, I started at a very young age. So to have somebody that has some articulation and some security to have an emotionally intelligent conversation where they're not blasting you for shaming or, the curiosities.
That's awesome. That's really great you're doing that work.
Thank you.
So I guess, you just said you got started at an early age. What was that path to become interested in psychedelics, and what has your path been like over the years?
Yeah, comparable to many, it was a rite of passage, and I think it found me. I wasn't necessarily seeking it. I came from a really beautiful family, and nothing was like alarming. Like I wasn't like touring or doing anything recreationally. I wasn't like a band of gypsies, and I just found it and had the privilege of hanging out with a lot of older kids that were recreationally using it. I will be an adamant, expressive person of recreational use is part of our culture, and so I don't shame it or shun it. And as a child, I was deeply woven in the culture of music and finding books that would literally just fall off the shelf, right? I'd find Stanislav Gross, LSD psychotherapy. I'd be reading and just nurturing myself within the Jungian models, and so just really digesting as much as I could. And all the while, every weekend we're hanging out doing, recreational things. And lo and behold, psilocybin kept popping up on my planet. And I had gratefully bypassed a lot of the perils that many kids find, and had a beautiful experience as I was a younger child, developing my consciousness and awareness, and always wanted to be a psychologist, always wanted to be a therapist, and just hold people. So comically speaking, people would want to go out and party or go run around in nature, and I'd be like, oh, come into my room, come into my bedroom. And, we'd be like closing, innately kind of following, the Graphian model at a young age. People thought I was either like super like out there, or they'd find something and recognize the real healing possibility.
Right.
Kind of comical, and in retrospect, don't know how it happened.
Yeah. And I guess like during your graduate program, you probably studied a lot or focused a lot on psychedelics, and I'm guessing
That's
part of
correct.
integration.
Yeah, so my graduate thesis was actually non-ordinary states of consciousness and the importance of transpersonal psychology, or the Jungian psychotherapy, as integration. So my biggest advocacy when I was doing my graduate work was through holotropic breath work, or I was able to talk because it was just a theoretical exercise. I wasn't actively using participants in graduate school. So using holotropic breath work under Stan's model, and then stories from people that were recreationally using LSD or psilocybin, and the value that people got from actually then doing, transpersonal psychology, Jungian psychology, or something as basic as cognitive behavioral therapy, where you got to talk it out or you got to express it out through art. And people would find so much remarkable things to kind of work with based off of an hour and a half or systematic therapy. The people that, just did the experience and then left it be and kind of let it percolate, there was a very dynamic difference. And
how so?
The fact that they weren't able to verbally or expressively integrate it with intention of a safety or a facilitator, right? So the facilitation, it wasn't that I was doing anything special. It was the space intentionally offered, Kyle.
Right.
To process. It's as simple as that. And to really break it down into an elementary idea is, after a session or an experience recreationally, my invitation is to intentionally give space to let it kind of digest.
Right.
Could be whatever process, ecstatic dance, meditation, cognitive behavioral therapy. But the importance is, what can we do to intentionally give space to digest?
I think that's so important because we don't have much of that in our lives, right? And so to offer that to somebody, I think it can be really cathartic, right?
Right. Well, it's very comparable to even our grieving process.
Mm-hmm.
3 days later they're doing a funeral, and 6 days later bereavement's over, and you're supposed to get back at it. And
Yeah.
I think it's very, very comparable to psychedelic work. Is, are people giving enough depth and space to process these amazing opportunities for growth?
Yeah. That's the one thing like I liked about training in breath work and just doing a lot of breath work. It was like they created a space for us to really just act out whatever was going in our psyche. And it reminded me a lot. I don't know if you know the work of Martin Practel. He's a Mayan shaman, grew up on a Pueblo Indian reserve, ended up in Guatemala. But he has this really great book called The Smell of Rain on Dust. And it's all about grief and praise. And from, his story, he always talked about how down in the Mayan village, when somebody died, people would just be out on the streets acting mad, crying, just screaming and totally just acting this out. And that was part of their process, right? They're really grieving and praising the life of this person that passed on. And kind of from that shamanic perspective, the tears are the vehicle that help, the soul transcend to the other world. And, so it was okay to really act that out. And it's like sometimes in our culture, we kind of close that off. And to give an example from his book, a student of his, I guess a family member died, and at the funeral, he was just like sobbing uncontrollably, like just really, really digging into that grief process. And I guess a family member called 911, thought he was having an emotional break that wasn't able to contain it, and was hospitalized for a little bit. And so it's just interesting. Yeah, we don't really have these containers to really grieve and to really process things in a safe way.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. And thank you for sharing it. It's amazing that we have a tendency to jar it and throw it in the basement and just wait for it to kind of come out sideways. And I think that's the value of having it emerge, right? It's that idea of what can we emerge. And another way you and I connected is that through the breath work, is just letting it happen.
Yeah. So, oh, cool. There's a quote by Stan that you included in your integration book, and I wanted to kind of riff off it a little bit, I guess. And this is one that I've always kind of come back to. The Western industrial civilization is the only group in the entire human history that doesn't hold non-ordinary states in great esteem and doesn't have any use for them, actually has pathologized them. Every other culture has spent a lot of time and energy trying to develop ways inducing non-ordinary states. And I'm just curious, what are some of your thoughts about that statement that Stan wrote about?
First of all, Stan is like the pinnacle. He's the man, and I bow to him. His brilliance and ability to walk both scientifically and spiritually in a parallel process is monumental. And when I hear that, it literally, it gives me expression to be, right? I believe people need this opportunity. If it's something as simple as active imagination while you're lying in bed after you wake up, or dream analysis, or meditative states in the dark, we as a culture in the Western society has really minimized the opportunity for growth, expansion of consciousness, and then let's just break it down simply, to be ourselves. Right? As a child, we're sitting here, we're told, oh, just play, go run around and play, go look at the clouds and see what shapes they are. And immediately, like 5 or 6, maybe 7 years old, you're like, oh, linear, cognitive, straight sequential things, and forget the imagination. And when Stan talks like that, it's a breath of fresh air to be able to really honor it and revere it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a powerful quote. I think that probably came out of the Ultimate Journey.
I believe so, yeah. Which is one of the, yeah. And where he talks a lot about that is, again, in just comparison of where we as a culture are limiting ourselves. And I talk a lot about that with people that are curious about psychedelics is, culturally speaking, across the entire world, people have been intimately taking these moments, these days as ceremony or experiences to not just like go off and party or go off and lose track of oneself, but actually hone oneself. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's also what Stan's talking about is you're trying to hone yourself, sharpen yourself and explore, not suppress and shut down and avoid what this is.
Right. Yeah. And the innate healing wisdom that kind of comes from these experiences. And when I read that quote, I also think about, how that relates to integration and these ideas of rites of passages. So just even thinking about you doing work with teenagers and just trying to provide some of that psycho ed about how powerful these substances are and how they should be held to some sort of, great respect. And there is a lot of responsibility that somebody needs to take when engaging with these substances. And then also, coming back and the cultural framework, you have a really powerful experience. And if you come back to a culture that doesn't embody these cosmologies within the psychedelic realm, it's like, how do you start to integrate it? It's almost like you're an outsider all of a sudden because you had this really profound experience and the culture is like, nah, that's, could be pathological or we don't believe in that or, you just took a drug, right? It's not
Right.
a valid experience.
Yeah, and that's a difficult thing because I think it takes a lot of self-esteem, self-awareness, and education. I would analogize it similar to someone going to another country, living in another country for some time, and developing kind of their way of life, and then trying to bring it back to where they come from. And before you know it, the people that are around them are like, why are you taking tea at noon? Or why are you taking this time to do that? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea I have with integration is being conscious of your confidence with why you're doing this work, really reassuring yourself that you're doing it with consent and understanding, so that when you're done with the session, you have some bedrock and foundation to go, okay, yeah, I really wanted to go into this, right? I really wanted to do this intentionally.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important. Could you speak a little bit about the Psychedelic Integration Handbook, why you wrote it? And I mean, this is a beast. This is over like 400 something pages.
Yeah, I think it's 478 pages. It's kind of a beast.
And you've hit like every topic in here. I mean, this is really like the ultimate integration handbook. There's just everything in there. It's pretty amazing.
First, thank you for the endorsement. That was really sweet. This book was, as I alluded to my 12-year-old self, Jay and I, the co-author, we wrote it with the intention that people could make it their own. I really wanted to. It was a lifelong journey of mine to let people create a direction for themselves so they could feel subjectively comfortable with themselves, that they could take care of what their interests are. All the while, it's broken into 3 parts. So the Psychedelics Integration Handbook is broken into educational. So the first parts of each chapter are kind of breaking down maps of consciousness. We're talking about addiction. We're talking about death. We're talking about different ways to integrate in the real world. Then we turn it, and I attempted to do this intentionally, is start to engage in that inner dialogue. I call it Now Your Turn section, where we ask questions. And I talk a lot about questions that are important for people to kind of reflect on if they're intending to use the medicines or the substances, and then if they've already done it. So it kind of is a twofold process, Kyle, that where people can explore, hey, I'm doing this. And there becomes a reassurance. Anyone that journals or anyone that starts building an inner dialogue, they can go, yeah, this is reassured. I want to do it. And then lastly, each chapter ends with an integrative exercise. So I actively want to kind of embody it. So we go through kind of, for lack of better terms, the thought process, the cognitive, the emotional process, the heart, and then the expressive body part, tying in all 3. And I'm wordy. I like to talk. And 18 million people were telling me, dude, this book is way too long. And I said, that's why I'm self-publishing it and just going to put out what I want to put out, just to have people read it and make it their own.
Right. And I think that's just a really awesome way to approach integration. I mean, whenever people ask me, like, what is psychedelic integration? Like, how do you approach it? I mean, yeah, I don't know. I wonder what your thoughts are of like, I think it's important to have some sort of framework, right? And to have the educational side. but it's also very unique to your experience, right? Like,
Totally. And I think the value is again, having a compartment and then playing within the compartment, right? So
mm-hmm,
the idea of education, the idea of objective thoughts, right? Consciousness, understanding traditions, understanding cultural stories, and respecting what our ancestors did, as well as then personalizing it. I call it psychedelic integration personalized because everybody has these unique nuances, no different than our fingerprint.
mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter how many yoga classes you do or if you can attain 3 meditation practices of 30 minutes a day. That's not integration if it doesn't mean anything to you.
Right.
And what I'd love to kind of sidestep with is that's where people need to recognize, what does it mean to them? What's their assigned meaning?
Mm-hmm.
I often say the label of integration is one thing, but if you don't have a personalized assigned meaning to it, there's no really service that it's going to do for you because you don't really have a direction or a line in. We want to
Yeah.
try to help you find a line into that integration process. So be it walks in nature, journaling in the morning, make it your own.
Right. And like, is there a framework that you embody when working with clients, and how would you define integration?
Thanks. The first part of how I would define integration is through a holistic process. And that might answer the question of what I do then with clients
Mm-hmm.
is, first of all, finding what that individual leads with. And when I say what that individual leads with, I believe integration is a holistic approach of that mind, body, emotions, and the spirit all together. And oftentimes I'll witness people, they're theoretical. They want to talk things out, right? Immediately after psychedelic experiences, they'll say, I started to talk, I wanted to formulate it verbally. Other people, they're embodying the experience or they're emotionally charged by it. And Kyle, I think integration is a holistic approach to answer the question that's active, that's
Mm-hmm.
always fluid, that's incrementally growing and developing, just like any kind of garden. And so for a client, if I'm working with them, I have to kind of seek out how they're responding.
Mm.
Do they lead with thought? Do they lead with emotions? And then to be devil's advocate, just like any psychedelic experience, I want to kind of spit in their soup. And what I mean by that, challenge them to use something different. Okay.
Right.
Put down what they're familiar with. Oh, great. You can cognitively make sense of everything. Or, oh, you can emotionally understand everything. Well, let's try to use a different tool to really expand the integrative experience, because I think integration is just as much of an experience.
Totally. Totally. You have a section in there, and this is something I've really thought about putting together a whole course on integration and self-care. You have a little section there, the difference between integration and aftercare. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot over the past few years, is how are we defining those self-care practices versus the actual like integration process, right? Like, I don't know, from my perspective, like self-care is a part of integration, but I always kind of see integration as this bigger process that unfolds over time. So I'm wondering like how you approach those two and why you included that in your book.
Yeah, the reason I included it in the book was because, again, it's a staged process. Integration, I think that's a great point you're making. Integration is one thing, aftercare and self-care is another. And so immediately after my own personal experiences, I'd find myself feeling like I ran a marathon. And there's no point to try to assemble any kind of integrative process of what that meant to me or what I was going to do with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, with integration, I think it's what that meant to me, what I'm going to do with it are very elementary kind of starting blocks.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have aftercare or finding yourself back in place, for lack of better terms, or put together, there's really going to be no road into integration.
Right.
And aftercare for me breaks down into, okay, is my body rested? Am I comfortable? Am I back into a state where my nourishments are coming back in? I try not to use too many of my clients' experiences, but for myself is if I'm not eating, And if I'm not drinking, and if I'm not sleeping, then it could exacerbate my process into something that wasn't what it really is. And so I need to fundamentally find grounding. I think aftercare is grounding. What am I doing to ground myself? Am I eating right? Am I sleeping right? Am I hydrating? Am I engaging with culture and community right? Am I back at it? And all the while, we'll have all the time in the world. And to plug chapter 11, it's integrations and stages. And I do a lot of that. I go, you have to grow slow. I love gardening, and you just have to just let it be. So if it means you wrote a symbol or you drew a picture, just leave it. But if you're not taking care of your body, you're not going to be able to integrate.
Yeah, that's so important. And it reminds me of like some of the work I was doing with people with quote unquote like early episode psychosis, and going in there with like a spiritual emergence framework and wanting to like do processing. And over time, learning that was the most important thing: sleep, like healthy food, exercise,
right,
and really getting that foundation before jumping into maybe some of the complexities of experiences, right? Because if we're not grounded enough and tethered, anchored, like it's so hard to process stuff. I mean, that might actually catapult us out a little bit more.
Oh, without a doubt. And I've seen it. It does catapult people out deeper. And I always try to make a saying out of elementary ideas solve for these complexities, right? So if you can find yourself getting 8 hours of sleep, you'll see a different person.
Right.
The semblance, and I appreciate your directness around sleep, water, food, because I haven't figured out anything else for aftercare. It's that basic.
Well, I mean, it was amazing seeing people in these quote unquote extreme states. And then it was just like, they're not sleeping. And then once they got their sleep figured out, it was like, oh, they're starting to come back to baseline. Right. And it's like, some of these things could be so simple at times, like, and then kind of go into the deeper processing and kind of more depth oriented work. But
well, I think that begs a little bit just of a side deer trail is oftentimes that's one thing we as facilitators or advocates of psychedelics have to remind people of. It might not be as complex as what people are thinking it needs to be.
Right.
It's
great point.
It's oftentimes we're thinking that it's going to solve the problems of the world or be that proverbial magic pill, but it might be something as simple as taking care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And if you bypass that, then it's only going to lead you down more of a spiritual emergence. And I wanted to make that an emphasis that it's not all the time these experiences of the meaning of life or, the cosmic union of the universal consciousness. It could be simply, hey, are you going to eat, drink, and sleep appropriately to participate? Because we all need to know our zip code at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah, it's like something I heard Jack Kornfield say at a conference one time, like, after returning from ecstasy, you still have to come and take the trash out.
Right.
Come back.
Right.
Yeah. 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 That brings up, like, I think about that, like, thinking back to some of previous experiences in my early years, and especially with like a lot of breathwork experience, like, I think sometimes we go into these experiences wanting to go into the transpersonal, meet the numinous, like, and really dig into these, Godhead experiences. And just thinking back about some of these experiences that I had, they were so basic at times. It was like, hey, you're not taking care of yourself. Just go back and like do this work. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Right.
Like that's it. Wow. Okay. And it's like, what am I chasing then after? It's like, am I just going to keep going after this numinous experience when I just keep getting the message of like, here's some basic things to work on in life. And this is the work.
Yeah, it leads to that context of what is sobriety for somebody and have I digested it all, rather than we talked about aftercare. And I think another important part of aftercare is the idea of when's it time to explore again, right? And have I given enough time to integrate? Have I lifted all the rocks and examined everything? Or have I participated in the process of my experience? And what I say is, have I ritualized and respected the big experience. And one of those deals, and I love everybody doing the ayahuasca, and I admire people taking the courage to do it. But, are you giving yourself enough liberty after 4 cups of tea and a week and a half in the jungle, and then say, hey, someone wants to give me psilocybin at home? And I'm just like, well, wait a second. Have you given yourself the space? Because it's always going to be there. Give or take the legality of this, it's always going to be there for somebody. And have you really digested, a week and a half in the jungle, and then say, oh, I'm going to, I just need to do this. I'm not done. I'm not finished. And my devil's advocacy is where's the sober time, right? What are you doing to keep sober and see if it really is fully integrated?
This conversation brings up, the famous quote by Alan Watts, you get the message, hang up the phone. And on this topic, I wonder how you view that quote or that statement, because I know sometimes people within the community think it's like, why would you ever hang up the phone,
Right. Well, that's going to lead me down to becoming probably identified as a hypocrite, and I'm cool with it, because at some point I'm not going to hang up the phone. And then at some points I'm like, and full disclosure, that's as it relates to ayahuasca, I'm like, I've gotten a lot of messages from grandmother, and I'm like, right now it's a temporarily, let's put on hold, right? And so to riff off of Alan Watts' comment, to play the middle is I'm putting things on hold only to make sure to identify different substances and compounds that actually might exacerbate other things I could heal. Different than my ability to do breath work. That's why I advocate, I know you do as well, the integrative exercise of breath work. Am I eating appropriately? Am I engaged in the environment appropriately? And so, again, to walk the proverbial tightrope of a hypocrite, there's oftentimes to set the phone down. And then there's other times where maybe this is, as Stan Groff calls it, the spontaneous catalyst for something. Maybe we've done everything in our power. Maybe we're eating right. Maybe we're engaging with right speech. Maybe we're talking appropriately and engaging in our world. And we still feel as if it's out of our reach.
Right.
That's where intention and working again with an appropriate facilitator or someone that's a professional that can pull that out of you. Another version of integration, really.
Yeah, totally. And just thinking about this idea of maybe multiple ceremonies, people going down and having ceremonies and then coming back and wanting to engage in the work. And it sounds like, you're really also advocating for this downtime as well, like for the integration process. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts about that idea of doing psychedelics, like thinking about some of Stan's work of, constantly redosing people in that hospital setting, peeling back the layers and having multiple sessions are helpful from that context, right? But when, I always get tripped up on this. It's like, when is it helpful to have these, continuously peeling the layers back, going a little bit deeper, and then actually just sitting with it and maybe taking months off, taking a couple of years off, and actually just doing the work.
Right. I had the privilege of being mentored by Dr. James Fadiman, and he has the idea that big doses should be once every 6 months. We've kind of described a quarterly basis, right? And again, it's objective to each person. But many of the variables, Kyle, that I do appreciate are people's emotional state of mind, what they've actually experienced. Have they experienced multiple sessions? Are they understanding what the whole magnitude of what could come up is really going to happen? Because what I've witnessed from people coming back from Costa Rica or Peru is they were the first time ever they wanted to do these heroic journeys down to the jungle. And then they come back and it's almost as if they didn't recognize. And so one of the pillars is prep. And I say it in the book, and I'm a broken record. And for those who have heard it, bear with me, but it's the purpose. It's reflecting on my experiences and do I have a history? What are my expectations going into back-to-back doses or ayahuasca ceremony? And then ultimately what differentiates is the potential. What is the potential? Am I ready to have an ego dissolution? Many people
Mm-hmm.
ask for it, or many people are looking for healing their trauma from birth or healing their experiences of this biographical life. But when it actually happens, to watch them try to put themselves back together with an ego structure to get through the day is much different theoretically than it is experientially. And I'm a prudent, cautionary person of like, let's walk into the ocean rather than diving into it off of a 50-foot diving board.
Totally. Yeah. I'm curious, being an integration therapist and working with people to help integrate, like, how do you approach when somebody comes to you and maybe you're a little worried about them engaging in it, or you do see quote unquote like overuse? Like, how do you work with clients when like you're starting to see this manifest, or you're actually having a little bit of concern of like, I don't know if this is actually right for you, but they're pretty like set on this is what I'm doing.
Right. First and foremost, I'm humble enough to know that I'm not the gatekeeper. I'm
Right.
definitely not the gatekeeper, and I want to make that adamantly clear that I'm never going to control what people's intentions are or uses. With that said, it's again a vital dialogue that needs to be had. Going in and seeing what's behind maybe our blindfolds, and myself included, I'll be like, oh, I need to do this. I need to do this. And someone close to me will say, well, have you looked at this? Do you fully process this? Do you understand the ramifications of this? And specifically, some of the things that alarm me the most are, and I'm conscious of talking about it, is the suicidal ideation. Right now, that's my biggest kind of tell, is if people are talking about suicidal ideation very significantly, which is different than chronic depression, I'm conscious of making sure we rule out, we find again a semblance of security within this life form before we go deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about it. I'm not going to be the one that sugarcoats anything. I don't know everything, and I'm the first person
Right.
to say that. But I'm also not afraid to have the dialogue of saying, hey, you just told me you're suicidal and it's active.
Yeah.
Can we regulate first? Can we really stabilize first before? And again, it's the idea that it's always going to be there. At some juncture, it will. I have faith with the beautiful culture we're developing that it will be there to heal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are some common integration challenges that you've come across over the years, whether you personally or things that you've dealt with clients?
Control and willpower. Control and willpower. And it sounds like a very vague statement, but wanting to control it, wanting to say, hey, I've done this and it's still not doing anything for me. Or
Right.
I don't have time to do it. I'm not putting aside, as you eloquently said, Kyle, self-care. I'm willing to put a day aside to do an experience, but it just is too much energy to write in the morning or do 10 minutes of yoga or give yourself nourishing food that you are attached to. And that becomes a kind of vice for people to say, hey, I'm in control and I want to be in control and I want it to be a passive exercise. There's no passivity to this at all. And
Right.
it sounds kind of challenging to hear, but you have to know that it's going to be an interactive, active process.
Yeah, it's very dynamic. I feel like it's back and forth, right? Like you want to flow and go down the river, but sometimes you also have to maybe move the rudder and control things a little bit,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Dan Siegel uses that analogy of going down the river, and one side of the river is rigidity and one side is chaos. And if you're like always going, that goes back to if you're always diving in and you're always psychedelically using, there's no kind of flow because you're always digesting. And the same goes for if you're overly conscious of trying to fit in the box of integration and it's, I got to do this, I got to do this. You're not allowing yourself to kind of flourish into maybe spontaneous information being delivered to you.
Yeah, and I feel like this is I've been really kind of reflecting on this over the past year or so. There was a point in my life where I was like enrolled in my transpersonal program, doing a lot of inner work, and just how much things flowed. I didn't think about anything. things just opened up, and it was just like, okay, this. And then, at some point that kind of stopped and became a little bit more rigid and wanting to control things. And it feels like a dance at times, right? Because it's like, how do you really practice this? And I'm noticing it actually come up a lot post Solterra, where it was like, I'm starting to surrender a little bit more at certain things, and things are starting to open. I'm like, oh yes, this is that flow magic. But at the other time, I'm like, but wait, I gotta like have some sort of grip on it, and how can I like maybe control parts of it? And it's a very delicate balance that I'm really kind of exploring right now, of like when to surrender, when to engage in it, and it's a dance.
Yeah, the idea of exploring as much as you can explore and then surrendering is just, it's a magical nuance, very magical.
Yeah. So in the book with the integration, you have this acronym SAFETY. Can you explain a little bit what that is?
Well, let's talk a little bit about the obvious nature of safety. Is you're fully vested in both the person and the environment, and that dovetails into the nature of mindset and setting. But really what you're also looking at is your consciousness, your awareness of what could come up. And lately what I've been seeing, without digressing too much into too many acronyms, are people are trusting too quickly. I think with the Renaissance and with the love affair that I have to this work becoming such a new gold rush, we're all wanting to jump on kind of blindly. And the idea of, hey, let's trust this because everyone's talking about it, is rather a misnomer. And I would appreciate the idea that let's give you what you need and really start to develop what you need for safety, or a pacification, right? And the pacification is one person's security blanket is another person's, nook as a child, and another person's teddy bear. And if you don't know what safety is to you, then you're not going to be able to kind of, I think, manage this territory, because, as you said earlier, the tethers are broken off and people are kind of frivolously hanging in the wind.
Mm-hmm. You just brought up a point that trusting too quickly, and we're both advocates here, right?
Yep.
Like, these things have changed our lives. Obviously, like, we've both done a lot of work here, and sometimes I trust the medicine, and preach that at times. But I wonder, like, do you have any concern how fast things are going at times, the way things are unfolding? Like, I mean, you brought that up, trusting too quickly, and people are kind of thinking it's a gold rush and just getting into it. And I mean, do you have any concerns as this starts to unfold a little bit more? Or have you seen things where you're like, I don't know if I really like trust this, or, this doesn't look too good?
Yeah, and without framing it as a loaded answer and generalizing too much, the honor of trust is so important. And I do think, not to go down the road of it can't be decriminalized and it can't be used as therapy. I am an advocate, Kyle, and I believe that it should be used for therapy. And I do love the decrim movement. With that, the conundrum for me is the culture has to be understood. Right? There's still a representation of the culture that mimics the 60s. Even the things you see on CNN and the classic news media, is they're like leading with, it's coming back. The whole idea of a renaissance means it's being revoked or reinitiated, renewed. And if we're carrying that cultural ramification of the 60s without continuously showing the scientific approach, which we're doing wonderfully, don't get me wrong. I just know that when I'm talking to children, they're coming in, the kids wanting to talk to me, more cases than not have tie-dyes on, and they're listening to certain tilts of music, and without being too discerning, there's still this kind of perpetual comparison too. And my worry is that we're not talking enough about the recreational use. We're not talking, we're spending a great deal, and I love it, the great deal of energy on trying to, federally propose therapy and therapy practices. But we're forgetting that the underground culture of recreational use is so strong. And if we're not in the trenches talking to these communities, and talking to the people, this isn't like cannabis when it was legalized and everyone's smoking a couple of joints. This is 6 hours to 12 hours to many more hours of intense work.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know not only the conscious things that could happen, the physical protections and everything else, you're walking down a tightrope or a dark staircase that could lead to some tragedies. And that's what scares me.
Yeah.
That's what scares me. And I just like you, I'm an advocate, but if we're not talking to the communities, the fringe communities, the communities that still revere this information, but don't necessarily know the ramifications of it,
Right.
I think there's value in that.
What are some things that you've learned from the recreational communities and those more fringe communities?
The most important one is the recreational communities, potentially they are using it for fun, which I completely endorse, myself being a deadhead and using different concerts. So I'm not only a hair club president, I'm also the member. I worry, right? I just worry that no one's talking about, like, hey, this is out in the open. This is going to become out in the open. And it's not like you're going to go get, an eighth or 7 grams and split it amongst your friends and people walking around the streets it needs to be walked with prudency and reverence. I want to just continue to see, and I do see it in the recreational communities, is ritual and reverence. And if we can continue to walk with ritual and reverence, I don't see any problem with it. And I'm not by any means any speakerhead of this. I'm walking both tightropes, right? I'm walking within both communities, and I love all these festivals, and it's a heartfelt thing to be pragmatic about the pace. I think everything in due time.
Totally. You brought up this idea of playing and having fun, and that seems sometimes like challenging, I guess, to the therapy world, where we view these as, tools to explore and to hopefully help treat trauma or depression, anxiety. And I wonder, like, what your take is on that clinical difference versus, like, actually, what is the therapeutic potential here of having fun? I always think about, like, my shamanic teacher, Michael, and sometimes I'd go chat with him, and I would just sit down and be like, like, this thing's going on. He would just look at me and was like, when was the last time you played?
Sure, right?
It's like, oh, yeah, maybe this is why we have some of these issues to begin with. We don't know how to have fun because everything's so serious.
I completely agree with you, and it sounds like Michael's an amazing teacher for that. I question that every day, that why does everything have to be such an existential crisis, right? And are we seeing the meanings of life a little too frequently? And at the intersection of fun and therapeutic, I believe there's a lot of transparency. There's a lot of in-depth ways that you could look at things and say, oh yeah, am I actually participating in the world, or am I letting the world run me over? And I think with therapy, that's one thing I've noticed with clients, is they're coming in with such a harnessed and honed intention that they're forgetting that maybe the fun of it, even in a therapy context that they're talking about or exploring, hey, there's an opportunity here to let down their hair, to explore themselves in a safe way, in an environment with a trusted facilitator, in a group that loves you and isn't going to shame you, can be rather healing. And then you can dance, and then you can play. And here I am advocating for, the play of it. It's not saying we're hedonistic or we're ignoring the fact that reality exists. It just could teach us some things.
Yeah. And sometimes I also think too about the social connections people make in those, quote unquote, recreational settings. Sometimes we're just so connected on the internet here to just be in a group of people, to be able to connect authentically in a different way, to laugh. Like, how healing is that? Right.
Significantly healing is the touch, the feel, and the connection. And I think the collective experience that one would have. I hear it quite often that people at a different show or an event or be it a festival, they have those experiences, right? That are collective and bonds, deeply bonds.
Yeah. So coming back to like safety and, maybe concerns or challenges ahead here. Before we started recording, I brought up this phrase that I'm pretty sure Larry Norris from Erie, and then he's also helped out with the Decrim Oakland movement. He brought this up, I think, when we were recording our course. What is psychedelic informed consent, right? And this idea of like, we can get psychoeducation. We can really like understand what these experiences are. We can read reports of people having these numinous experiences, and hey, I want to have this healing experience. But like at the end of the day, like, can we really prepare ourselves enough to go into some of these psychic spaces, right? Like we want to create that ultimate set and setting to foster a really deep, profound spiritual experience, and then something else completely comes up and you're like, I was not ready for that. I had no idea what I actually signed up for with this. So any thoughts around that phrase? Or
I love the idea of informed consent. It's the crosshairs of sexuality as well. And we talk a lot about that in the world of sexuality as well as psychedelic integration. And what Larry's saying is super important. Do we know what we're coming into, and do we have the capacity to accept what's coming into it? And I often lean with this idea that people have to address enough and go at it. Maybe they have to go at therapy for quite a bit. Maybe they have to read 15 more books. And I see a lot of clients do that, is they need to know when it's right for them. And in conjunction with that, there can't be a forced effort to say, hey, I'm ready to do this. And just because I signed up for an experience in Peru, or just because, doesn't mean that they can surrender to it. And that's often when I see a lot of the tragedies, Kyle, is that they're saying they're ready for it, but they're not. Their consciousness, their physical body, or their emotions aren't fully allowing them to release. And another elementary kind of concept I bring in is the idea that people have a morning beverage, and they love their morning beverage in the morning. Their physical body asks for it, their mind asks for it, and their thoughts ask for it, be it coffee, ice cold water, or an energy drink. But I guarantee you, if you ask that person at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, one of those three, their physical body, their emotional heart, or their thoughts, is going to be locked. And why I bring that up, Kyle, is because I don't think people listen to that with psychedelics. Just because they've read something, I cognitively understand that. That means I'm physically ready to do it and I'm emotionally ready to do it. Or just because their heart says, oh, the medicine found me, doesn't mean they've researched enough of what could happen.
Right.
And so I want to allow people to think about this idea of unlocking your physical body, your emotional heart, and your mental mind, and making sure they're all aligned.
I love that.
Oh, thank you.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's so important to listen to that, right? I made a comment, I think during my episode where I was debriefing Solterra. It's like, that was my first time with the medicine, and it's called to me for over 10 years, right?
Sure.
And it's just every time, because there is that saying, it's like, oh, the medicine shows up when you need it. And to some extent, yeah, sometimes that's true, right? But other times it can appear, but maybe it's also not the right time. And to really check in with yourself and check in with your body, your heart, your mind, your gut. And for me, my gut is always like, hey, something feels off. This isn't the right time. Even though you might be aligned in other ways, right? You're like, oh, but this kind of just showed up in my life. I feel like I'm in a good spot, but maybe something else is off, right? So really kind of tuning in and listening to that intuition.
Factual. That is 100% fact. And it's reassuring to hear you say that. And the endorsement is this self-care. It goes back full circle. Is, are you taking care of yourself? And are you playing within something that you feel is necessary? Have you ruled everything out? And we all know that we can't answer everything and have everything prepared for a magical trip that's going to heal everything and give us answers to everything we want. But we can prepare the best we can prepare. And that's not something that people think about often. Is they're like, oh, I'm going to just kind of go into it, or let the medicine tell me what I need. Well, you still can have buffers. You can still insulate yourself. and still protect yourself emotionally and physically and have, a safety net.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think the preparation is so important and sometimes overlooked. Even with like breath work, we say your process really begins when you first land on the page to sign up for a workshop. And what would it be like to pay attention to your dreams, pay attention to your emotions? What would it be like to actually start changing your diet a little bit before going into the experience and really prepping yourself to make these changes? So then, maybe on the tail end after it, you already have some of these new rituals established, and it might be easier to integrate and be like, oh, like I've already started to actually make these changes. And I had this peak experience or this transpersonal experience. And now, well, since I already started this, maybe I can just continue it, right? So preparing and doing the dieta is really interesting to notice actually how important the preparation is. Just noticing some of the sacrifices that I made and actually how better, like how good I felt, and then trying to continue that afterwards. Like, well, I already started doing this stuff. How can I just continue to follow up with it, right?
Totally. And I think that brings such a presence. What I hear you saying as I translate it is that preparation gives you presence. So you're practicing a different eating habit. You're watching the way your physical body's reacting to everything. And then there's this continuum through the session into integration that has a golden thread of, oh, I'm present to this. There's an awakening to it. And you do it in your ordinary consciousness through the preparation and intention. Then the non-ordinary experience and the spiritual experience happens, only to then carry over into, hey, let's be more mindful of. And I often hear what you're saying so frequently is, I'm so much more just aware, right?
Yeah. So it's a challenge that like sometimes I see, and even thinking about some of my other experiences, it's like I got so motivated like after a session and I start planning. I'm like, I'm going to make all these big changes and I get it. And then you have those quote unquote relapses on certain behaviors, or just like, maybe you start eating not healthy again, or maybe you gave up on your exercise routine. And how do you approach that with people, because sometimes I'm like, man, I feel like I just lost all that medicine. I was doing so good and then all of a sudden life happened and now I feel like I'm back where I started at times. And,
there's a two-prong approach I use. And the first one is I see things as there's acclimation, right? And the idea of acclimation is no different than climbing Mount Everest. And if we're looking at our medicine work and our spiritual journey, or just life in general as a journey, it's like climbing Mount Everest. I've never had the privilege to do so, but I've had people that have. And they've really appreciated that. It's just like medicine work. You go up, but sometimes you hit a place where you can't go further and you have to assimilate and get comfortable, and only to go back down a little bit, Kyle. And that's not failure. And I advocate this to the listeners and people reading the book is you can't see integration as a failure process or something that only brought you so far. It's an opportunity for you to go, okay, I need to step down a little bit. Maybe I can't be vegan, and maybe I thought I was going to be vegan after I did my ayahuasca or psilocybin or whatever, just using an example.
Yeah.
But the idea is, well, there's still movement. There's still growth, even if it's incremental, even if it's very baby steps. Only to keep going up. And the next time you go further, you're going to be much more aligned with what your ideas are because you're more aware. And ultimately, I say this, and it's the last word in the book, is I say, just be gentle with yourself. We live in such a culture right now, Kyle, that it's like, oh, I got to get this. I have to. And psychedelics, I'm sorry if anyone says that, they're full of it, is there's no attainment. You're not attaining anything. And if they get that, please call me, let me know what that attainment is. Because just be gentle with yourself. Be kind.
Yeah.
We're not kind enough to ourselves or others. And it's important as we're integrating.
Yeah. A message I always get is like, we're human. We're going to get caught up with humanly things again.
Right.
And that's okay. Right?
It is okay.
I feel like this is the experience, right? Like, I think we need to be a little bit embodied and have like mess up and backtrack. So then you learn how to maybe change courses again. It's kind of like that old, I don't know if it's a Buddhist or Zen story about like walking down the street, falling in a hole, getting out of it, walking down the street, falling in the hole, repeating itself until you realize there's a hole there.
Yep.
I'm going to walk around it, right? And sometimes these backtracks are just an opportunity to be like, oh yes, this is here.
Yeah.
Maybe next time I'll try to walk around it.
Right. And there's awareness to that. And I think awareness is beautiful.
Yeah. Man, there's so much more I want to ask you. Maybe I want to have you back on, and we'll get Joe on as well, because there's some stuff that I think with like some of the Graphian framework, like, and just talking about different things like that, that'd be really awesome to chat. But a friend of mine, Jesse, shared your podcast that you did with Psychedelic to me and listened to it, and I thought that was a really great interview. And so I was just saying that I was gonna chat with you today and ask, and I wanted to see if she had a question, and she was really curious to know, do you have any thoughts on salvia?
It's interesting. That's the one thing that a lot of people are using lately. And
really?
yeah,
Huh.
it's fascinating. And maybe it's because they grow it in their rooms or whatever they're doing with it. I'm apprehensive with it because I've heard a mixed bag from people. I've heard amazing awareness, very comparable to almost an opportunity like ketamine, where they're with it and they're talking with it. And then I've heard stories that it didn't sit with them. It didn't sit with them very well. My own personal experiences I'm articulating is it was very similar to a ketamine experience, where it was very for me it was very embodied in a relationship of conversation with salvia. I had the opportunity to talk with it differently and actually have a dialogue that wasn't like over consuming me. My, I guess, prudent approach is what the medicine that's drawn to you is what's drawn to you. And I have no way of telling you what you can and can't do. Yeah. But my personal narrative has been very comparable to a ketamine experience where I was able to kind of keep theoretical dialogue with it, which was reassuring. I've heard other stories where it was like, I don't want to do that anymore. And maybe I don't know what their story was, but
I did it when I was much younger. I think I was like 19. Very, very strange experience. But I guess also too, it's like sometimes the route of administration, like smoked, I hear is just like, it's just really intense, right? And if you kind of come from the shamanic perspective, the spirit doesn't like to be burned. It's disrespectful. So like the oral, maybe that's different, right? Using a tincture or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And what Jesse's asking, I think, is a question to say, what's, again, the draw? What's the draw? And to get off on a little bit of a soapbox is, I think this idea of everybody wanting to have the check boxes, they have the rubrics of this, I need to knock off. This, I haven't done this yet. I need to check LSD off. Or, I need 6 APB, I need to do this. Or, I need to do ketamine. Or, I need to do, and the list goes on, right, Kyle? And be really mindful of, why am I doing this laundry list of psychedelics, and what's my goal? Nothing against it, but there's a ton out there, and just be conscious of your education around it and your supplier and what you're doing with it. And
that's the one thing I come back to all the time when I'm talking to people about this. It's, for me, it really just comes back to intention, the why, right? What's drawing you towards this, and why are you seeking an experience like this? Can you find it elsewhere? Right. Maybe breath work. But why are you looking for this experience? And, if you are going in with it with a conscious intention, be like, well, I kind of want to explore this. Then, okay.
More power to them. And there's nothing against that. If they're going in with an intention of reverence, again, I think reverence is super, super important. Integrity is both of oneself and of the compound. Dennis McKenna talks about these as compounds. They don't have any mystical kind of connection other than what we as human beings have created the narrative to be. And if we can be gentle with why we're doing it, I think it will serve you.
Right. Awesome. Well, we're over an hour a little bit. So is there any last, pieces of advice, any last comments that you want to make, wrap this conversation up for today?
I think the most important thing is that as long as you lead with love and you walk with integrity of others within this community and honor each other's opinions, they're so divisive now, and everyone's coming with different schools of thought. And I think each and every one of them is beautiful, and enter into seeking understanding. Kyle, my only request is have people seeking understanding and inquiring dialogue, because there's such a fruitful dialogue out there right now. And it's only going to help the movement. It will only help the movement, is continuing an emotionally intelligent dialogue.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And I definitely want to have you back on for part 2 to talk a little bit more about Groff and even your work with sexuality. And I'm wondering, just curious about the crossover between psychedelics and sexuality. So we'll definitely explore that next time. That'd be fun.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And it's a deep honor. I appreciate the time.
Yeah. And one last thing, where can people find you and where can people find your book and do any pitch that you want to do?
Yeah, thanks. I have 2 websites, one called the psychedelicintegration.net. I also have a website called Healing Souls, SOULS, LLC.com. That's primary sexuality. And you can get the book on Amazon, the Psychedelics Integration Handbook. So I appreciate the plug and thank you for the endorsement.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Westrum, thank you so much. And until next time. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Ryan Westrum. I know I really enjoyed chatting with him and just talking about integration and just kind of connecting and realizing that, hey, we kind of have a nice kind of similar orientation here with the transpersonal psychology, breathwork, Groff, all that stuff. So it was really awesome and really grateful for Ryan's time for coming on the show. So again, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, comments, anything like that, feel free to email us, psychedelicstoday@gmail.com. And don't forget to subscribe to us on Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple iTunes or Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Definitely check us out on YouTube as well. I've been trying to release a little bit more of our video interviews there as well. So, all right, everybody, signing off for this week. Again, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you on the next episode of Psychedelics Today.